hospitality group?
Yeah, so the quick summary of my restaurant life, how it got started was being an athlete my whole life and just being extremely competitive to a fault at times and waiting tables in the summers. Started working for a local restaurant group here in Oklahoma City when I got out of college instead of going to law school or whatever that path I thought was going to be for me. Climbed the ladder within that company and realized that there were so many things about the industry that I loved, and entered a contest in 2012 for an old laundromat space here in Oklahoma City, which was a very interesting story in itself, but lost and then came back with another idea when they couldn't come to terms with the person who won on a lease. Empire Slice House was born in 2013 here in Oklahoma City.
I mean, 2013. God, doesn't that just seem like a completely different
We're so
era?
old. We're so
Oh my
old. Yeah.
God, for sure. I opened my first place in 2010, right?
Okay.
Just a different world entirely, predating social media and all of these things. Um, you built in Oklahoma City, right? And I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, so I understand like small to mid-sized metros. But I chose to open in Los Angeles, California. And the reason, right? Well, but also I would say less brave, right? Because there's a larger total addressable market. And I thought that, there was a higher likelihood of success. I also didn't worry about exhausting the market with multiple concepts. I don't think that people think Oklahoma City and they go, that is a place where I can absolutely crush it and build a restaurant empire. What did you see that you think other people don't?
This is something that I speak to people about now when I travel. It hurts me, it pains me when people ask where I'm from when I'm in LA or Chicago or New York. And I say Oklahoma City and I say it with pride. And they're like, and how is it there? And the truth is that it's amazing. It's a great place to do business. A lot of those things I see when I travel to those cities, I'm able to take inspiration from and look at maybe what the gaps are here where I live and try to apply that, make it approachable, make it work for our market, and manipulate those ideas a little bit so that they fit the people that we're serving here, but also people that are moving here. The cost of doing business here is low. The city continues to grow, and we have the Oklahoma City Thunder. So, what else do we need?
There are all these limiting beliefs in our industry, right? Like, oh, my market's too small, or oh, people in this market won't pay, or oh, like all people care about in this market are the big chains. And Lord knows when you got started, I mean, I would argue that Oklahoma City was just, covered in
Fast food
chains.
mecca, chain
Yeah,
mecca.
absolutely, for sure. And it's like, why would you open anything? Everybody wants to go to Applebee's. Like there are a lot of limiting beliefs in smaller secondary and tertiary markets around palate, right? Well, people don't want good. What they want is like consistently boring. And I think there's so many people listening that believe all of that crap. And you challenged all of those limiting beliefs. What has been your experience working in a secondary market?
I think that there's a misunderstanding of the market here and of the people here. And really, don't get me wrong, I can't imagine how much more successful we could be and the local restaurants could be in these smaller groups if we could shift more people out of these chains and into local restaurants. I was kind of came into this at a really nice time. There were some local restaurateurs who came before me. And so the movement was already happening here. And I just came in out of some local groups. So I already had some connections with some of that clientele. And at a time where we weren't shaming people for their palates or what they could afford or what they were used to, but we were just saying, what if? And part of what we've done over the years is try to educate without making people feel stupid, or that they don't know something that Chicago has or New York has. It's just saying, what if you tried this and what if you liked it? And I think that's been something we've tried to do here because I care about furthering the city and the state in a lot of different ways, and restaurants have been a really nice tool to try to do that.
Talk to me about that because that had to be an evolutionary process. Marketing in general is an iterative process, but nobody goes, I want to be educated, I'll go to a restaurant tonight. So,
Yeah,
right, for sure, right? Like nobody wants to
sure.
hear that shit from us, but they are curious, right? But I would argue most restaurant patrons, regardless of tier of dining, are inherently curious, but also simultaneously unwilling to ask.
Hmm.
So, how
Yeah.
do you
I
create that safe space where you're able to inform people?
I think I could use a couple of restaurants that we've done over the years as an example here. Our first restaurant was a New York style pizzeria. That was not news to anyone. Pizza is the OG to go food. It is, can be a fast food. So the people here were already very knowledgeable about that. So that was, I think, good that we started there and earned trust from people about how we operate and the atmosphere we create and the culture. And then, partnering with a good friend of mine who had spent some time in Chicago and had become a really great ramen, Asian cuisine chef, looking at that and kind of testing it as a pop-up dinner for almost a full year to see how everyone liked it or what they didn't like. Could we work together? All those types of things. But that restaurant is Goro Ramen. And when we rolled it out, I think when you go to some of these places, they're so focused on being traditionally Japanese, every word, everything on the menu. And we wanted to make sure that we included that, those words and what things are called, the traditional names, but we put a glossary on the bottom, and it was just kind of like, hey, so you don't have to ask. I mean, how many times, maybe not yourself, or maybe at one point in your life, like I've been to some restaurants where they have an only Italian wine list,
Sure.
and my Italian is not great, but to be able to present something to people where they feel like they can ask questions and us not scoffing at what they're asking, and those kind of subtle ways of explaining things maybe without them having to ask, was Goro was a good example of that. I think at Elisabetta we've done a nice job where it's an Italian focused restaurant, but our wine list is from all over. We just wanted to include great wines. There are Italian wines on the list, but I think a lot of that too is how we present these things to people and how we speak about it with people.
I'm 46 and I still don't ask. And I don't ask because it's uncomfortable. I'm a restaurateur that goes to other restaurants. And when people
Right.
ask, how is everything? I'm like, it's great, even when
It's
it
great.
wasn't. Um,
Totally.
but it's because I don't think that's the question you ask when you really want to know the truth. I think that it's a performative question.
Yeah, it can be. I also think that sometimes I'm asking because I genuinely want feedback. And again, I think the way we present the question and the way we engage with the guest can really warrant a very honest answer that sometimes helps us in the way that we operate and present things to people.
I want to talk about your evolution as a restaurateur. It's one of these big obscure things. Maybe Cornell, maybe they teach you how to become a restaurateur, but generally, most of us just kind of fall into it in the way that you did and I did. And I think that when we envision what a restaurateur is, when we close our eyes and we picture it, what we're actually picturing is what restaurant managers do, because I think
Hmm.
it's really hard to encapsulate what it is that a restaurateur does. And we all come to it at our own pace. Some of us never, because it's hard. It's hard to figure out. And it's so much easier to manage because the return on that investment is immediate, not in terms
Right.
of financial stability, but in terms of like satisfaction for a hard day's work. Um,
Hmm.
so I would ask you, like, how do you define today what a restaurateur is, and how did that process evolve for you over time?
God, that's like such a loaded question
Yeah,
because
it is.
sometimes I question, and maybe you can relate, is do I know? I spent my whole life comparing myself and watching people like Danny Meyer and Bastianich and these people, Nancy Silverton from these other cities, and going, that's a restaurateur. But, where did they all begin? And I think a lot of people are probably familiar with Danny Meyer's story and kind of, some of the path that he took to do that. It was maybe a little bit different than myself in some ways, but we truly are managers of those restaurants. I think the people I've seen have the most success running restaurants have actually worked a lot of positions in there. It definitely gives you the best chance at success to really understand what a dishwasher does and what it's like to run saute on a Friday night when your person didn't show up, or when your walk-in went down, or all these things that keep the wheels turning outside of this fun part, which is creating and looking at our market and growing some of these brands that, support these fun ideas that we have. And so I guess for me, I'm an obsessor of my restaurants. I am a lover of restaurants. There, of course, are moments where you want to throw in your towel or your hat and just say, like, man, this is tough. And it is tough. But I am a believer that anything is possible to a fault at times. I have one tattoo that I got maybe like 8 years ago. It just says figure it out. It faces up towards me because that's what being a restaurateur is. It's figuring out funding, it's figuring out the location, the lease, your staffing, training, culture, all those things. It's just really all encompassing. And I think maybe it's not the restaurateur part that changes, but as we get older, it's maybe our title, within the company, whether that's, in the beginning you were the GM and then we created a hospitality group and I became the president and then that changed into COO, CEO, CMO, CFO, all these other things. But I guess for me, it's just really just loving restaurants. I'll never get tired of them. And what a fun job that is to do something that you truly love all the time.
I want to go back to the fact that you piloted the ramen pop up for a year.
Hmm.
What that really highlights is patience, right? It's the only thing, the joke I've told on this show 1,000 times, and I apologize to everyone listening that listens with any consistency. It's been that like the only thing I ever wanted in the world was to own a bar, right? Until I owned one, and then the only thing I ever wanted was to own two.
Hmm.
And so, right, that urge to grow, right, even meaningless. It wasn't like I said, well, if I own two of these, I'll make twice as much money. I wasn't even
Hmm.
thinking about money. I was just thinking
You
about
can't.
growth. Talk to me about like the diligence and the patience that it took to prove product market fit before you believed that you earned a spot in the market.
Well, and aside from proving product fit, it was proving to myself that I could do it.
Yeah.
When we did Empire, I was naive. I literally entered a contest. I had a decent amount of experience and kind of had a front row seat in another restaurant group for how they conceptualize things. And I was in some of those meetings and I saw some business plans. And so that helped me run the numbers first and have an idea about what it took to, I think, do that. I never dreamt that it would be more than one thing. I thought I'll have this one restaurant. And it was not a success right off the bat. It took time. It did move, decently quickly. I think around, year 1.5, 2, I felt like we were doing well. And I was consulting for one of our landlords at an existing restaurant that they had. And when I was doing that, I realized that I could multi-unit manage and that I enjoyed it. And that's when I contacted my friend, and the pop-ups and the underground dinners in 2015 were all the rage. Of course, we were following what were they doing in Los Angeles, and we were starting to see some people do cool stuff in Tulsa. And I just said, I see you have a ramen truck. How's that going? And tough. Food truck life,
Oh my
so
God,
hard.
for sure.
So tough, man. Like, as an extension of a brand you already have, maybe.
Sure.
As an only unit, very difficult. Anyway, so we did a pop-up dinner and I just did it for fun. I didn't even do it to test it. Now, I think along the way I started thinking these are selling out, like we have a good working relationship, this is unique, I'm passionate about it. And when a space became available, it fit what we were thinking a ramen shop should be. And that's how Goro started as our second full service restaurant. I'm not sure people would describe me as patient, especially earlier today, but I was doing my best. Uh, you know, Sense of urgency. I just want to stamp it on everybody sometimes because I just run at full speed. But one of the best things I've learned over the last 13 years is when to tell myself no. Um, People will say, like, man, we really need a great Indian food restaurant here in Oklahoma City. That doesn't check my, I agree. That would be awesome as a consumer to have that, but that's not me. I'm not believable. I don't know anything about it. And I would love to see someone else do it, but it's just knowing when to tell yourself no when some really interesting ideas or proposition. Developers will come to us and say, I've got this space, I'll pay for it. It doesn't matter. I think I was reading Restaurant Man by Joe Bastianich, probably like 8 years ago, maybe 10, and it's so dated now. But there was one thing he said in there about how he had built a concept to fit a space and how that really didn't work out well for them. And I really took that to heart because I did that when we did a Mexican restaurant for a developer in late 2016. And it just never quite worked. It wasn't well thought out. We did it for someone else, I felt like. And so to this day, I've told myself, like, I'll never do that again. I'll always, maybe there's something I become passionate about or very knowledgeable about, or have a partner, an operating partner who is. And if there's room in the market for it, then we will do that.
Well, and I look at your market and I see that, there was room for ramen, right? And you were able to fill that gap. But whenever we open anything new, I think like the most uncomfortable but most important question we can ask is like, does the world need another whatever, right?
Right.
Mexican cantina, Italian, like
Right.
insert whatever it is you think you want to do. And it's
Hmm.
hard, right? Because I mean, even in secondary and tertiary markets, right? Like there are so many Mexican cantinas, there are so many
I know.
Italian joints, and so you've done so well, right? With another pizza joint, another burger joint, right?
Hmm.
Another Italian joint. Um, Understanding that like all of these things to a greater or lesser degree exist in the market, how are you able to carve out space for yourself in it?
One of the questions I ask myself is this unique? And what about this is different? For Empire, there was only one other pizza place in town at the time that served pizza by the slice. And the way they were doing it is they were cooking off all cheese slices, and then you would order and they would top it with whatever toppings you asked for and then send it through an impinger, pops out, there's your,
Gross.
combo slice. But the quality of those slices was
Sure.
not
Not
great.
great.
And also, there were very few late night restaurants at the time. When I was a server here in town, we would get off work for, maybe it was like 10:30 or 11, and the only options were the local pub that had fried mozzarella sticks and fried chicken and smoking and all the things. And or there was one Italian restaurant that had been here for a long time, and that was one place. And then there was one diner. So really, in my mind at the time, there were only three. And as an industry person, I wanted to cater to the industry, and that's really what I think set Empire apart in the beginning. Was what do we want? And also, industry people are your best word of mouth, and
Sure.
creating somewhere for them, I think, built our reputation as being one of them because we are early on. With Goro and the ramen restaurant at the time, there was one other place. They were, traditional Japanese style ramen with a pork based broth. Well, Jeff, my partner, was really into doing a chicken based broth. And we thought that was very interesting because being from the Midwest, we could compare it to chicken noodle soup, and we've all eaten that. And, and also from a business perspective, we were looking at it like it's cheaper, it's faster. Tonkatsu is like a 60-hour broth at times, depending on where you go. And for us, it was a cleaner, it set us apart, and we've tried to take that into everything we do. Elisabetta, the Italian restaurant that we're doing right now, there were only maybe two places in town where you could get fresh pasta, like made daily, different styles. And so we took that, but we don't claim to be traditional Italian. That is an aspect of what we do. And then we took some other items that are familiar to people here. We want a filet. How do we make it special? We want, pork chop Milanese. Like, we're doing things that are Oklahoma, but we're just tweaking them a little bit to fit the concept. So that's definitely one of the things I always think about. Is there are a lot of great places here. We're working on a bar right now called Coco's Cocktail Club, and it originally started as maybe this like Mediterranean Italian like bar. I was very obsessed with that for a while. And then my friends who were actually nominated for Best New Bar James Beard finalist this year at Later By, they already did it, and they did it better than I could ever do it. And I'm so proud of them and I'm so happy for them, but it had to shift the direction that I was going. And I think it pushed us to come up with something pretty interesting. But yeah, you got to have a unique aspect of what you're doing if you're going to do something that there are a lot of. And that's something that we really try to stay true to.
What's your approach to growth? I mean, it's, I look at your portfolio and I see that, you've grown across multiple tiers of dining, multiple concepts. Some of those concepts you've chosen to scale up. Um, what what is your perspective on growth? Is there a finish line? What does it look like?
I was with my fantastic business coach from 12:30 to 1:30, and I swear we've been talking about that for so long. And with the Kentucky Derby just passing recently, she always says you can't be a racehorse with no finish line.
Right.
It is a detriment to yourself because you're never happy. And also it's a detriment to your team that you just push, push, push. And also they don't know the direction that you're headed. And so I've really tried over the past couple years. I am not great at it yet. It is a work in progress to decide what does that look like. And for me, Empire started as one. Then we built a to-go shop of like two doors down on the same street out of necessity to handle volume. And then we realized, well, actually during COVID, we were kind of forced to combine the to go and our regular service into a new building that we had built for the same concept in the same district. We realized we could combine those two things there, and we picked up the one we had and we moved it away. And when we did that, we realized that, man, there's a lot of demand for this. It's counter service. It only needs 20 staff. The average unit volume was blowing my mind, and the occupancy cost was less because the square footage was less, and all these things. And so it was kind of like an organic movement where we saw it work again, and then the numbers were making sense. And so we tried again. And that Empire is the vessel that allows my fun brain to create things like Elisabetta or Goro or Burger Punk and Coco's. And I, as a human, would not survive if I was just duplicating all the time. It is an extremely important concept to our company, but it's not all of who I am. It's not all of who we are. And so we actually have about kind of split into two branches under the same umbrella. We have an Empire team, and then we've got sort of this 84 team that handles one-off new concepts and is a lot of the structure that oversees all the stuff on the back end for both sides. But, our hope is to continue to grow Empire. We'll see how far we can take it on our own. People are the hardest part of what we do,
Of
but
course.
God, I love them, and they can be so good, and we have a great team at the same time. But when you start getting to a point where you're trying to operate out of state, and it's just, how far do we want to take it? How much is enough? And I'm not sure I want to be the person that is the CEO of a 50 unit pizza company or concept throughout the Midwest. We'll see. That changes day to day as our team
Sure.
grows stronger and I continue to grow. But yeah, I'd love to see Empire continue to grow. And then, potentially there's a sale of it at that point. Um, we're doing some research to see what that looks like now as we have about 8 units currently.
Let's talk about people because you brought it up a few times. I think that you talk to any restaurateur and like, oh, people, right? But it seems to be the blind spot for most of us. It seems to be the thing that we struggle with when you look at small independents that are struggling to grow, right? They'll tell you that the hurdle is X, Y, and Z, but it's almost always just people. And
Mm-hmm.
then once you have the right people in place, the next big hurdle is going to be culture. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you come from two very different worlds, and I think it served you well, right? First is like the world of the industry because you came up through the industry, right? And it's very familial. But the problem with family is like you lie to family. You don't hold family accountable, right? Do these pants make my ass look fat, right? The answer is always no, of course not. It's the fucking pants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so like that's the nature of family, right? It's the reason that so many things go unspoken. But on the other side of it, right? Like you were a very accomplished athlete, right? And like teams are different than families. teams are rooted in trust and accountability. And
Yeah,
so
your
I'm
ass
wondering,
does
like,
look fat.
yeah,
Right.
right, your
They'll
ass
tell
does look
you.
fat. You need to get on that
Yeah.
treadmill. Uh,
Yeah.
right. Um, like nothing can go unsaid on a team, at least not a high performing team. And so,
Hmm.
how do you marry those two things together that seem like they would oppose each other into what is obviously a very successful culture?
Yeah. Man, it's a fine line to walk between being there with them and doing things with them and letting them know you, and building that culture within not only the 84 team, but the stores. And also being able to say, hey, that is not the standard to what we're trying to do here. I think a lot of that comes through, over time, we have to have processes and we have to have accountability. And that is something that we work on all the time. It's funny that you mentioned family. I actually work with my dad, my sister, and her husband. My mom and stepdad are investors that came on kind of later in the game in a couple of the restaurants. And if you think it's hard to tell, someone that you're not related to what to do, try telling your dad that you don't like the paint that he picked for, a new restaurant or the way that we did something. But I do think it's important to try to blend that I care about you, but we have a job to do. And my role as the captain of this team is to make sure that the people on this team are not hurting those around them by inability to act or decisions that they've made, or when they're not doing their job. It is unfortunately my job to come at them with those hard things. And, I always look at myself first when something's not going how I want it to go. Did I give them what they need to be successful? Did I properly outline their job? Did I spend enough time with them, or did my director spend enough time with them, or a district manager, making sure that they really understood not just that they need to fill out this budget sheet, but that if it doesn't look right, where the problem might be, and keep driving and keep driving. And if you have done that and you find over time that that person is they have the knowledge, but they choose not to, that's when we make a decision there. And if we're getting to that point, odds are they already know and have already been told that that's what's happening.
Isn't that the whole bag? No one should be surprised that they're getting fired.
Right.
I am a
Yeah.
business coach myself, and probably the hardest gut punch she ever gave me was a few years ago, and she turns to me and she goes, your ability to succeed in life is exclusively tied to your ability to have difficult conversations. She goes, you've got to lean into it. You've got to get really good at it. You don't have to
Hmm.
love it, but you've got to be able to do it like you love it all the time. Because if you don't, nothing changes. Nothing gets
Sure.
any better. Um,
Yeah.
what a horrible thing to tell someone, especially
It
considering the
is, but
fact
it
that
is
it's true.
but it's being the mafia boss, right? Like
It
you,
is.
you tell the guys what they need to do, but sometimes you got to show them how to do it. And it's not pleasant, but also I think it can be just business. I don't think it has to be emotional. And I am extremely competitive. I have extremely high expectations of myself. I would never ask someone to do something that I would not do myself. And I think that that's played well with me over the years. It's not just because I told you so. It's because I know, because I've done it. And we've exhausted all these ways to teach you and try, and either you're not capable or you don't want to. But I love you. But see you later.
And talk to me about, because I want to go back to growth for a minute. Because one of the things you said is, we've tried things that haven't worked out in the past, and, I'm trying to be patient. And what it sounds like to me is you have an internal checklist, right? Where
Hmm.
you're able to clearly delineate between what is an opportunity and what is a distraction, which I would argue is probably the greatest hurdle of any
I'm
restaurateur.
trying. I'm not
Oh,
perfect,
yeah.
but
Look,
I
who
do
are you
try
telling? Look, I'm right there with you.
for
If you
sure.
figure it out, you let me know. But
Right.
focus is the hurdle for us,
Hmm.
right? That if you do one thing with maniacal focus, that thing is
Hmm.
guaranteed to succeed. So, like, when you look at like the four live concepts we have, right, and you see all of the different opportunities that are presented, as well as, once you've gained an ounce of notoriety in a market, every developer is calling with literally the greatest opportunity you're ever going to get in your life until they present you with the next one. um,
Hmm.
how do you separate the opportunities from the distractions?
I mean, I think part of it's come from making a plan and also knowing what our team is capable of right now, and also recognizing like what I'm capable of. As much as I love restaurants and obsess, I'm still a person, right? I have to have time for my family. I would be a demon if I did not travel and spend time with my friends. And so that whole how much is enough thing, I step back sometimes and go, I have to be my best self to be able to be a good leader. And if I feel like some of these things from an operational standpoint or behind the scenes, financially or something, are not running well, I can't do anything else yet.
Right.
So to me, it's not as complicated as it used to be because I know myself more. I know my team, I think, better than I ever have. And until I feel like everything is running smoothly and I'm not having to dive in and say, what's going on with this manager? Why haven't we updated the menu yet? This food cost is way too high. Until I can stop doing that, I can't do anything else. And that goes back to that team thought. Whenever I was young, I always thought that I'd be a coach, and I loved sports so much. And I guess in a way, I've become one, different than how I ever thought I would be. We're always recruiting. Uh, you want your best five players on the basketball court at all times, or your best nine players on the baseball field, and you have to have a bench to build. And if we don't have that, then we're not going to make it to the playoffs. And so we can't go any further until things are running pretty smoothly. And I do feel like, currently we have plenty of people on our team. We're dialing in some new teammates right now. Sorry. And
You're good.
getting them ready to for growth, but it's taking a minute as they've come from a different group that doesn't really operate the way that I do. It's not that what they were doing was bad or wrong, it was just different. And so we're spending a lot of time right now doing that. And then hopefully we'll see what comes next.
You've mentioned coaching a lot, right? And it's because of your sports background. I had no experience with business coaches or any kind of coaches or anything. I came up in through the industry, and that's just not a thing. And then I joined a group called EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization,
Hmm.
and a lot of my peers in there from other industries, they were like, well, do you have a business coach? And I was like, no. And they're like, well, you should get one. I was like, that's not really something we do, bro. And he goes, well,
Right.
don't you don't you see that that would be like an unfair advantage for you if you had that? And I thought to myself, like, ooh, I would like an unfair advantage. That sounds really good. And over the years, I've had many coaches in many different aspects of my life and my career. And as a coaching consultant myself, I don't advocate for myself. What I do is I advocate for that entire sector,
Hmm.
because coming out of sports, which I didn't, you'd be shocked if you saw someone in the Olympics just kind of like wandering around by themselves, right? They didn't have a coach or a team of coaches around
Hmm.
them. High performance athletes use coaches, right? The greatest athletes in the world have coaches, and if they didn't, you would be shocked that that is the case. So talk to me about your perspective on coaching and how it has impacted your life and your career.
Yeah, the way that I even kind of came to having a business coach was a developer that became a friend was telling me he was part of a men's group here in Oklahoma City, and that they also had women's groups, but you had to be invited. And then the CEO of that company, who's an amazing woman, Jean Hopper, she would come have a coffee with you, hear about, you had to be a business owner. That was the catch. And see if she thought you'd be a good fit for the group. We all signed NDAs. They let me in the group, and I enjoyed it for a period of time. But what I found, I think I was probably like 33 years old at the time. A lot of the other women that were in the group, they had different lives to be. They had children, they had started their careers later, they were in different industries. And so I had a hard time connecting with a lot of what was going on in there. But I just asked Jean like directly, I just said, do you coach people one-on-one? And she only did two CEOs at a time. And story of my life, one had just left. And so it opened up a path for her to coach me. And I think I've literally been doing that since 2019. Um, it's funny, I'll go in their days and think I have nothing to really talk about. That's a joke.
Yeah.
We always have stuff to talk about. I was just dumping thoughts earlier about, and she's worked in all different industries, Harvard Medical School and with Apple and Cupertino, and what a resource she is for Oklahoma City. She's working on the Olympics and some of those sports that we have coming here, and all these great things. And so I'm not sure I would have made it through COVID mentally sound, whatever that means, when we came out, without her help. It's really hard to, working with family and working with all these people that I care about, but I'm the only operating partner. I am the decision maker when it comes down to it. And sometimes you don't want to share your fears with your dad, who might worry, or,
Sure.
your team, or shit, maybe sometimes it's about your team. And a lot of the time it is. And, not to just get stuck too much on what having a business coach is like, because I know not everyone can do that. It really helped me, and it helped me become a better coach of my team and myself. But when I look, I'm like a root of the problem person. And, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, like say we're using a budget spreadsheet, and we've introduced it to the general manager who's never used it before. Yes, we want to show them like a summary. This is what this is for. This is how we're going to do it. But we also have to teach them to problem solve. And I think a lot of the coaching I do, and it's so hard, uh, it is letting them try to an extent, and then firm, gentle pressure, corrective action, hoping that they get there. And then I truly spend so much of my time with that, because we can't do it without them. We cannot do this
Sure.
without our team. We can't do it without people. I'm just one person. And there's some really good ones out there. And I really feel like, and it seems like it's a time suck, and it seems tedious, and you will think that you have 800 things on fire that you need to go deal with. But what if you took time to coach your team, and then they go and put out the fires? And actually, even better, what if they're so proactive because you've taught them how to look, that you never have a fire? And that's something that we really talk about a lot, is like getting down to the basics and the root, and then just like being there with them and accountability, and trying to provide those support systems for the team. And that's something I try to do for the team, and also coach the team to do for each other.
Yeah, and I would also assume an extension of that is this willingness to allow failure within the organization.
To an extent.
To an extent. Look, I'm not.
Yeah.
The thing is this, like I can remember, and this was a conversation that I had with not my business coach, but my forum. And what we were talking about was the fact that like I would twist myself into a pretzel, trying to make sure that like no one ever made a mistake.
Right.
And the question that was posed to me was, well, I mean, do you make mistakes in this like growing, burgeoning
How dare you ask me
business?
that? But
Right.
yeah, right.
To which I said, I mean, obviously not. I've never made a mistake.
Perfect. I'm perfect.
Right. And then like they kept threading the needle. They were like, well, do you learn through the things that you do well, or do you learn through mistakes? And I was like, well, I do learn a lot through mistakes. And they said, well, and how expensive are some of those mistakes? I'm like, oh, some of them have been very, very expensive,
Right.
And then they say, well, if a general manager was to make a mistake, how expensive would that be? And I was like, oh, not very, and they're like, well, why don't you let them learn too? Why don't you give them the grace that you afford yourself? And I just
Yeah.
never thought of it from that perspective. And so if you were successful as an athlete, it's because you failed your way there, because you were always testing and pushing limits. How does that approach impact how you treat your team?
I kind of go back to the original Empire, and when I was starting to kind of peel off there a little bit, then I remember looking at one of the managers, and I was trying to not be there and like save them or micromanage them, and see how it went, so that I could see if we could keep growing. And I literally looked at one of them and I said, there is only one thing you can do wrong tonight, and that is to let the oven guy walk out.
Mm,
And anything else you do tonight, you can call me, or we can fix later. And I think setting those parameters for yourself, what does success look like, and limiting failure to something that's fixable, or that's a great moment to use to teach is okay. And as a person who just loves to win and wants everything to be perfect, it just isn't. And when you
Right.
introduce 400 employees into the situation, you're never going to be perfect. We're never going to get to everyone. It's just not possible. And it's not that I accept failure. I really don't. But Jean phrased this at one point. I said, it's win or lose. Okay. And she said, what if it was win or learn?
Mm.
And I was like, shit. Okay. Touche. And I try to remember that sometimes for myself and also pass that to the team. Another interesting thing is you see people do all these personality tests and MBTI and some of those things, but I just straight up ask people, how do you like to be coached? How do you feel like you react to certain things? When I played softball, I taught hitting lessons to like 6-year olds one summer. It was super cute, but they're all so different. I mean, people are so
Sure.
different. And what I realized and kind of took from that at the time was is I was always teaching the same three things, but my delivery based on the kid might have been different, but the result was the same that I was trying to achieve. And again, I try to use that as an example with the teams is if someone's not responding to this one thing, you know, try it a different way with the same result, the same goal in mind. And I think that that's sparked some of that for people who maybe weren't trying to teach 6-year olds how to hit home runs. But they can relate and say, huh, okay, what if I did come at that from a little bit of a different perspective? And I think we've seen some success with that.
When you talked about, getting your coach, signing up with your coach, and the fact that like when you had asked, someone had just fallen off, so there was this opportunity. And the way you posed it, Rachel, it sounded like it was fortuitous, and that is a common pattern in your life. I would ask
Yeah.
you, like, are you lucky? Are you a lucky person?
I mean, I didn't bet the right horse at the Derby, so not in that way. But I believe, and I'm not a very religious person. My dad and my parents taught me from a young age just about like treat people how you want to be treated and be a good human. And there's been times I've been pissed at like how someone took advantage of something, whether it was a landlord or a bank or a whoever, and wanted to react in a way that was like, I'm gonna like revenge. That doesn't really serve us well. It's fun to think about sometimes, but I think ultimately I just try to be a good person. I try to be the most knowledgeable, hardworking person that I can, and I try to apply that to everything. And I believe that by doing that and being open to things and keeping my ear to the ground and making these great relationships with other restaurateurs or developers or whoever, that has led me to some really interesting moments like, Gore, the first Goro building was a landlord in the district. And when I moved Empire, it was the same landlord. And I could give you 100 examples of things that have happened, but there's got to be a little bit of luck here, right? Like, um, no matter if you had all the numbers in the world and the best idea in the world, there's that little bit, whatever percentage you want to call it, that's truly being in the right place at the right time with the right idea. And I hope that continues to work for us.
Yeah, I think you make your own luck. I'll share a study with you. I thought this was really interesting. I have always been the luckiest person I know. Always. I'm from Southern Louisiana. When I was born, my mother took me to a psychic, and the psychic said, which I'm sure she said to all mothers, like your child is going to be exceptionally lucky his entire life. Right? She told me that from a very young age, and it held true. And there's this university study that was done, and I thought it was fascinating. So what they did was they handed someone a newspaper, and they had two groups of people that considered themselves lucky statistically, and people that considered themselves objectively unlucky. And they handed both groups the same newspaper, and they said all you have to do is go through the newspaper and count the number of pictures in the newspaper. And unlike the third or fourth page in, there's a full page ad. It's an image, right? And the ad reads, there are X number of images in here. You can just close this thing and you're good to go. And then at the end, there was another image. If they pass through that says, if you say this phrase, you're going to get this extra bonus at the end. We're going to give you like $100 at the end. Statistically, the people that found themselves or considered themselves lucky, they saw those ads way more often. Statistically, no one that considered themselves unlucky saw those ads. Zero. And basically what the study found was, and it speaks to exactly your point, I think it's just a beautiful illustration of it, which is people that are lucky are open. They're just open to possibilities, right?
Yeah, I
Think your
yeah,
whole life could change with this one conversation, right?
Mhm. So we joke, or I joke sometimes. I'm not sure if anybody else thinks it's funny or not, but I joke that I'm a witch because if I put my mind to something, it's honestly insane. I truly think I can make anything happen. I think I said that earlier. Like, to my detriment, sometimes I believe anything is possible, and I think if I think hard enough, try hard enough, meet the right person, and open in the right place at the right time, that it's gonna happen. And again, I can't count how many times that has been the case. So be witchy and get lucky.